Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. We are thrilled to be here live today at American University at the School of Communications in the McKinley Building for our conversation with Ed O'Keefe. Now, today's especially unique for us because I'm a graduate of American University, as is Ed. So the privilege of coming back to campus for this conversation is pretty exciting. We might hit the dining hall after, check out our old class. It's going to be pretty exciting. So Ed is the senior White House correspondent for CBS News, and we're thrilled to have you here to talk about media, politics, the election, and everything happening in Washington. So I think to get started, maybe we just kind of tee it off 2 weeks ago today, big election. What is your kind of feedback, observation about how it went down? Were you surprised? Were you expecting it? What's your kind of 2 weeks after the election kind of?
Sure. Well, look, 20 years after, I would have been a senior 20 falls ago. Dating my now wife, this building was a suggestion of what it is now, or was just in the process of being rebuilt. And I know my wife had classes in here before and still kicks herself with the bad timing because it looks so much different now. And a lot of what is now on campus was not here, so it's always great to come back. I don't live that far away, but to actually come back onto campus and see how it's changing is a great thing. To get right to it, I wasn't entirely surprised in that, based on the polling we had done, and more importantly, based on the reporting we had been doing over the course of the year, we knew a few things. One, we knew this was a tick-tock tight race. We knew that given how close it remained in all 7 of those battleground states, that it was very likely that all 7 could break the same way, whether it was to him or to her. And we knew that a few fundamentals were still true. Being a vice president never guarantees that you'll get elected president. You can talk to Al Gore about that. You can talk to Walter Mondale about that. You can talk to Richard Nixon the first time. You can talk to a lot of other guys. Anytime the economy is perceived to be in bad shape, notice what I said there, is perceived to be in bad shape, the incumbent party doesn't do well. So those are 2 big fundamentals that we're working against Kamala Harris. And third, the fact that it was so tight and that he was performing better than he had performed in 2016 and in 2020 suggested that he had found more support. And in the various scenarios that we published a few days before, if you go look at them, there were 2 basic ones. One, she turns out more women of both parties and all ideologies and gets over the finish line. Or 2, he wins by bringing out millions of people who don't normally vote. Well, what did he do? He brought up millions of people who don't normally vote, and that's how he won. And all those other fundamentals being true, if you studied it and followed it as closely as we're paid to, it wasn't entirely surprising. Why was it surprising to other people across the country on both sides of that argument? I would argue it's because you're all bifurcated, and you probably aren't opening your eyes wide enough to other sources of information. Probably wouldn't hurt to get up from the screens every so often and talk to your friends and neighbors or the guy sitting next to you on the plane, and to think about and really listen to why it is certain people feel a certain way. And I would also point out, he's now suggesting he has a mandate. He does not have a mandate. He has about 49.9% of the popular vote as of last night. So he did not win a majority of the population. She has about 48.2. Jill Stein and others take up the rest. But as the count continues to come in from California, where they wait for mail-in ballots, sure enough, the margin is closed, and he's no longer over 50%. So he's robbed of something he expected to have and wanted. He will probably ignore it to some extent, at least until it becomes more apparent. But it was a close election, and it was a close election in those battlegrounds, closer there. But it was also close in places like New York and New Jersey and Virginia and Minnesota and other states that aren't necessarily considered battlegrounds. And that is a testament to the fact that either voter opinions are changing, or Democrats who normally win those states weren't selling something that the voters wanted.
Being so close to it and with your relationships out there, talk a little bit about the Democratic Party and maybe the confidence leading up to it, and maybe now the kind of blame game that's happening.
I wouldn't say there were many confident Democrats at all. I think most of them were nervously anticipating a close victory, but I think all of them understood that things were not entirely breaking their way. Not until the final weekend did some start to believe that they had turned a corner, but they were probably basing that on partial, mostly anecdotal data of what they were hearing and seeing. And, there was, I think that the biggest indicator to them in the closing weeks is something was going wrong for them, were those early vote numbers that were coming out of places like Georgia and Nevada and elsewhere that showed more Republicans were voting, and they were arguing, well, this just means that Republicans are voting earlier. It doesn't mean they're necessarily going to make it up on the day of. There was a mix of that. There was some more on day of Republicans who showed up. There was also Republicans embracing what is now the norm, and that is that millions and millions of people really like to vote early and get it over with. So they miscalculated on that. And, I think there's still a lot of Democrats kicking themselves over the idea that perhaps they should have forced President Biden to reconsider back in 22, 23 and allow for an open primary process to happen. And as he said, and as Nancy Pelosi used to say to her would-be opponents as well, there's nothing stopping any of you from trying. Go right ahead and try. And I think he was also implying that if you come for the king, you best not miss, which is what scared off some. But nobody tried. And there were plenty who were thinking about it.
But was that a serious thing on his part that you heard, that he was maybe not going to run again?
No.
It was always the plan.
Look, they came out of the midterm elections where everyone was predicting a red wave, and where a red wave didn't materialize. And with a head of steam and a belief that he could do it, he plowed ahead. And nobody in the party really stopped him from doing so, other than Dean Phillips, who made the point that many now agree with, which is he was too old, he was not the guy for the times, and it was time for a new generation to try to take him on. But the fear of being able to defeat Donald Trump was so deep-rooted, as plenty of people know and experience, that they stuck with him until, of course, July.
So in 2020, you were on the road with the president, right? So you had that perspective. This year you were in the White House briefing room. Can you talk about that perspective in your job 4 years ago versus today, and how that felt?
What about you? You mean about him, or
just
about
you and your coverage and your day-to-day perspective?
So much of presidential campaigning, I think, really is not only skill and having a good operation and making clear to people why it is you want to be president or would be a good president. You have to be able to answer those fundamentals. But you're also someone who's probably matching the moment, right? And he went through some really dark days in Iowa and New Hampshire to get to South Carolina on Super Tuesday, when his party realized that was the best option. He was the man at the moment. This time, his party was led to believe that he could do it again, but there were many concerned about his age and his abilities. And so they turned to the vice president, who many thought might be the person to match that moment, but clearly was not, at least not to 49.9% of Americans and 312 electoral votes worth of the contest. Maybe she would have been if she had more time, and that will be the unknown forever. And, I think alternative histories will be written about the last 4 years, and one of them will be that, yes, after the 22 midterms, maybe he would have said, I'll take a pass. You guys go find it out and figure out what makes most sense. And that might have worked. And I think one of the things I've observed by 28 will be 24 years of doing this, primaries have a really good way of conditioning candidates and parties for the general election. They can be embarrassing, they can be expensive, they can be distracting, but ultimately they shake the trees in a party such that the most active participants are found and participate through the whole cycle, that messages and pitches get sharpened, that answers are given early on, they get changed later on as more people start to pay attention. And I think Democrats were fearful of what a primary would cost them, both financially and from a public perception standpoint, and maybe now realize that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. Some of them.
Sure. It's been a pretty busy 2 weeks for the president-elect. Talk a little bit about what you've seen, how you think this rollout of cabinet appointees has gone. I mean, it started kind of a little traditional with the Marco Rubios of the world, and kind of.
Well, again, here it's like if anyone is surprised, then you haven't been paying attention. attention. Look at who has surrounded him for the past year. Look at what he has said in the past about loyalty and about rewarding those that stand with him even through the darkest moments. They are people like Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, and more recently, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. People that he likes to have in his orbit because A, he thinks they're smart, B, he thinks they look the part, C, he thinks they're qualified to do it, D, it drives the other side crazy that former Democrats turned Republicans are willing to spend so much time in his orbit and work for him. And E, they fulfill his ultimate goal, which is disruption. They would bring a disruptive and very different perception to how to run the jobs they're being asked to do, whether or not they get them. His goal is to fill all of his cabinet level positions or announce who he would nominate for those cabinet level positions by Thanksgiving, so by next week. And he's on pace to do that. He's got a handful of domestic ones left: Treasury, Commerce, Education, Labor, HUD, and I think that's about it. And then there'll be other senior staff and who are the deputies at these places and what about other agencies. And you've seen him go sort of sporadically from Secretary of State and Defense Secretary and Attorney General to FCC Commissioner, Southern District of New York Attorney. Like he's kind of bouncing around. We know that it's a chaotic process, as is the norm with him. We know that it's driven a lot by whoever's in his presence. We know that he is rewarding loyalists, believing that the Senate will bend to his will. We'll see about that. Outside of Gaetz, Hegseth, and Gabbard, the others are sort of in line with the kind of person Republican-led Congress would probably support. I think Kennedy will be an interesting one, but we've seen even some Democrats say, look, if he can check certain aspects of his beliefs on either lifestyle or diet and really wants to go after the corporate greed and influence over our healthcare system, by all means, let him do it. And it might be a way for some of those Democrats to say, look, there's an area where I find general agreement with the new president and his team. Because what Kennedy's espousing is actually something that's believed by many Democrats or those on the left. So we'll see. But again, yes, it's shocking in the moment, and it's terrifying to many, and it could very well put the lives of Americans at risk if some of these people are put into positions of power. But if you've been paying attention for the last 2 years, or over the course of his political career, it should not surprise you that people like this are getting these positions.
So for those of us who were paying attention during his first term, more recently, what are your predictions for this next term?
I'm not in the prediction business when it comes to that. It will be disruptive. That is what he promised. It will be, a pretty active time. The disruption is especially acute here in Washington, but that's because this is exactly the place he wants to disrupt. And so buckle up, or don't, and decide to step aside and get out of the way. But that's what he has vowed to do, and we will cover it as aggressively as we have in the past, and we will, see where it goes.
Talk a little bit about Congress. So to your point about some of this maybe being a bit of a test on the Republican Senate and leadership, how is this going to play out? I mean, from a checks and balances perspective?
Well, I think, if we spent the last 4 years worrying about what Joe Manchin was having for lunch and who he was voting for, how he was voting today, now that he's retiring, the dynamic over who we track most closely in the Senate changes considerably. It shifts to other people in the middle, or who can be found in the middle sometimes. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, others who are running for re-election in 2026, or what does a Tom Tillis of North Carolina do on every other issue? Yes, the president-elect won North Carolina, but barely. North Carolina remains a state that Democrats believe ultimately they'll be able to get the way they got Virginia and the way they've been able to turn Georgia purple.
And Democratic governor in the same election.
Exactly, and quite popularly elected. So those three, Mitch McConnell, now that he's been unshackled from leadership, how does the Dua Lipa song IDGAF go? I mean, he may not. Look it up. He may not anymore. And so where does he start to perhaps stick it to his longtime nemesis, the former president, or the president-elect? Well, he's both. That's another one to watch. And then Democrats, to what extent are they going to stand against things? When might they find common agreement? Not only in personnel, but in policy. There will be some examples of it. But will we immediately see the class of 2020 that ran from 2017 to 2020 start sticking to them and say no? Basically early identify that I'm interested in running for president? Maybe. But it may take a little longer this time to see which of the Democrats are more outspoken and which ones are willing to hang back. And over in the House, look, if 2 or 3 of them miss their flight, catch a cold, or have to go to a retirement party for their uncle, you're going to have essentially an evenly divided House. And so attendance is mandatory. And it's going to be a real struggle for them because if you try to get 435 people together for something, it's not difficult, it's not easy. And so there will be times when the speaker's holding up things or having to cut deals. And again, we'll see which Democrats are willing to do that. We'll see which Republicans have to stick it to the president. It'll be a lonely endeavor for some of them because especially over in the House, they are far more loyal to him. And I think we can all hope that it gets beyond the sort of school cafeteria style disruptions and arguments that they've been having with each other and that they actually try to get some things done. Because if they don't, voters will look at that in 2 years and decide what it is they want to do.
Well, we are here at the School of Communications at American, and we're grateful to Chris Hosney for giving us his classroom today and students to be a part of this conversation. Let's talk a little bit about media.
Yeah.
You spent 12 years at the Washington Post, now at CBS, kind of traditional media. What's your kind of thought on the media?
Traditional media, legacy media, been around longer than you have media. Look, as with academia, as with real estate, as with government, as with technology, we are in the being disrupted and adapting business. And I think that's what we're in the process of doing. I'm heartened that it seems that, at least for my parent company and for a handful of others, the cost of building up streaming may have turned a corner. And so we've hit a point where it is en route to make money. I know nothing else besides what I read, but I know that that's probably a good thing. So as long as that's happening, and the obvious trend line is that people are essentially consuming video information, but doing it either over the phone or sitting at a laptop, hopefully having paid a subscription and not just borrowing their parents to watch Netflix or YouTube or Hulu or whatever it is, and that's the wave of the future. I do think as long as we're in that space and as long as we're an option, and there are many options, we'll continue to do good work and we'll get found. And I'm heartened by the fact that I get stopped in an airport or on the street or at a campaign event or in the grocery store by someone who says, I watch you on a regular basis. They're probably someone who's older than us, right? Which means they're still watching it through television or on cable or through a cable provider that brings in Channel 9 here in Washington or Channel 2 in New York or Channel 2 in Chicago. But then if you meet their kids or their grandkids, they might say, oh, I did see you the other day. And it's probably because they've got either Paramount Plus or the CBS News app, which is free, no password required, or they're streaming us on YouTube and they found us and they go back to us. Or they may just be following CBS News on TikTok, which apparently has more subscribers than the viewers for some of our broadcast shows. So these are places we have to be.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to continue to see a lot of us continue to do the journalism that we do and just make sure that it gets to as many different platforms and screens as possible. And as long as it's the same quality and standard and meets the expectations of CBS and it gets found by the next generation, awesome. And maybe it leads to them sitting down at 6:30 one night or 7 o'clock on Sundays and watching the full program that we provide. Maybe it means they're just catching a few minutes of it, but we are one option. And I've heard some of our bosses suggest that while we are considered broadcasters because we have FCC public service obligations as an original broadcast network, that increasingly we're all in the business of narrowcasting, right? That you have options and you are choosing those options for whatever reason. And we have to consider ourselves increasingly like more like narrowcasters as opposed to broadcasters. We will always have and should continue to have public service FCC obligations, which means the cost of what we do is a little bigger and more expensive. And it's funny because I can think of campaign people and political sources who said in the past, why is it so much harder to get time from CBS or, why aren't you covering whatever? It's like, well, I understand why the cable network you could go talk to instead is spending time talking about this or is inviting you on to share your thoughts on whatever, and also on a lot of things you're doing. But that's because they have 24 hours to fill with stuff like that. We get 2.5 hours during the day to fill with, 2.5, 3.5, depending at the national level, to fill with news and information on a network that also has game shows and soap operas and primetime dramas, and that's fine. And that's part of being a broadcaster. You're providing a broad array of options. We also now have 24/7 platforms where we could cover some of that stuff more extensively we want to, but we've learned that there is an audience that doesn't necessarily want to hear cable political talking heads all day long. They want to get information, or they want to see coverage of live events, be it a wildfire, a presidential news conference, or something else. And so realizing that there are ways to do what we do and do it in different ways, and that we're going to treat or service different audiences is fine. And as long as we have a clear mission, which I think we do for the most part, I'm fine doing it with CBS. I've never gone to bed at night or woken up the next morning regretting the work I did. That should be a baseline for anyone in whatever it is you're doing. Maybe they're not paying you enough. Maybe you would have liked 45 more seconds for that piece. Maybe it would have been great if that other guy had called you back and it would have added one more thing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm proud of what we're doing. And sometimes we overcorrect or we underperform journalistically on certain things, but we're pretty good about right-sizing that pretty fast.
I'm trying to think of a way to frame this. Another media personality and big name as of late, Elon Musk and X. What are your thoughts on them as a competitor?
Well, he's a
media absorption.
He's a business executive first. He happens to own a media property. He also happens to own rocket ships and electric vehicles. So he's diversified his portfolio. That's great. That's fine. That's fine. He's not the only guy to do that. Robber barons did it back in the day. They own newspapers, right? But they also own oil companies or shipping companies. So it's no different in that regard. He does what he does and needs to be covered as a public figure, needs to be covered as a government contractor, and needs to be covered as a media executive. And I think we're all doing a pretty good job of it. And the influence that he currently has over the president-elect is notable, has to be closely tracked, and is somewhat unprecedented, at least in modern times. So he's an incredibly influential figure, and in line with many that have existed before him, that have crossed from business into media and back. They're always going to be there. And look, he's done to X what he's done to X, but I think what has happened to X is indicative of what's happened in the digital space more broadly, which is that it is more ideological, or there are ideological options for you to find, and your algorithm may or may not adjust to those. There are fewer filters on truth versus unverified information, factual versus unverified information. And I think the lesson to everyone is watch what you've watched, read what you've read, but take a deep breath and think to yourself before you react. Because what you may have just seen may not be real, may be designed to provoke you the way that you're being provoked, and may just be entertainment masked as information. And so I've said this for years to classes here and to groups elsewhere across the country. You can passively scroll through, you can flip through the channels, you can turn the pages, but it's on you to be discerning and to keep your guard up when you're reading information, and to do your homework and be aware of who the source is that's providing you this, and then really make you think about, is this accurate? Is this something I believe? Is this something I should share? Or is this something I should go learn more about before I express myself?
Well, as we wind down, we'd love to get your perspective. I mean, you've had a front row seat to presidential politics, to state funerals, January 6th, to Supreme Court nominations and hearings. What are your most memorable moments? What kind of has stuck with you as a kind of privileged experiences that you've had at the front row?
It was funny because I was just looking back at pictures even from this past year, and I forgot that even our vacation we took in April. I was like, wow.
Lots happened since April.
There's a lot. Yeah, a lot has happened since April. I just continue to be, and I think this is the joy of being in journalism, is I still get tickled by the fact that I get paid to go see and observe and sort of write back about what's going on. And that is the beauty of the First Amendment that we all cherish and, especially in an institution like this, thrive on. And we have to preserve it, and we have to ensure that it's there for everyone's benefit. I think, at times it can get a little hot on either end of that amendment, and we have to be mindful of that. But I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm here because of that first Bill of Rights. And, it's everything from getting to go to India on someone else's dime because the president went, or, being in the room when he announces, big important things that the world is watching for. And that's a thing I think people forget, especially here in Washington, believe it or not, that when the president is addressing the nation, he's not just addressing the nation, he's addressing the world. Because the world turns to what it is we're doing and thinking and saying and deciding so closely. And I think we need to be mindful of that increasingly, that the world really is watching and is learning from us or is adapting from us. And that's something to keep in mind. But, I don't know, there's so many different examples this year. The one that will always stick out to me, and I think it's a testament to being ready and not entirely being able to ever let your guard down as a journalist, is the Sunday afternoon that the president dropped down. I'll leave you with this because it's a testament to the perils of being a working journalist who's also a parent. So that was the Sunday after the Republican convention. So I had gotten back on Friday from Milwaukee, and throughout the entire convention there were the murmurings about, is the president going to drop out? Is he going to stay in? And you ask anyone who was covering this, anyone who was near him, and you know that it went 2 or 3 times a day. He's going to stay. But for some reason we hit a lull that Saturday or Sunday, and I was like, I don't know, maybe he is going to ride this out. So I woke up on that Sunday, doing some things, didn't shave, put on a t-shirt and shorts, sneakers, and took the girls to the 140 showing of Despicable Me 4 up in Bethesda. And didn't turn off the cell phone, but suddenly at 1:44 it vibrated with a phone call from the producer I had talked to about 2 hours before about what we were doing Monday morning. And I didn't answer it. And then she texted me right away. She was like, I just want to make sure you saw the president's tweet. And it was when he was announcing that he was dropping out. So I panicked. And this movie's just beginning. And the girls are spellbound watching popcorn. Girls, we gotta go. What? Says the 9-year-old. We gotta go. Why? I'm not leaving. Well, the president just dropped. I thought to myself, she has no concept of it. So I texted my wife, who was trying to get the afternoon off, because she'd been with them, through the convention and everything. I said, Biden's dropping out. You need to get here to the theater. I gotta get to the studio by 3. She's like, oh, okay, I'll be right there. So she had to Uber over, I had the car. I waited for her in the lobby, literally tapping my foot like a bunny and Bambi, Thumper. Like, where is she? I see her on the escalator. I throw the keys at her. I throw the tickets at her. They're in the third row on the right. And she runs in. I take off. And I eventually get to the studio by 3 o'clock. On the way back to my house to change, because again, I had, I'll never wear shorts in public again. I'm going in jeans or whatever. Anyway, and I'm getting home to change, and they call and we need to put you on the air with a special report. So I'm like in my house, trying to get ready, talking about what had just happened. Did that for about 5 minutes, hung up, changed, and got downtown. And later that night, they sent me to Delaware. They're like, you got to go deal with him at home. And I said to the girls, look, sorry about earlier today. Don't know where this is going. I'm only half joking when I say I'll see you in November, because obviously we're off to the races now. They got it. I was home more often than that, but it was a great example of you never know in this business where things are going to take you there. Not in this business, in this line of work, in this sort of vow that you take, and you can hope that your friends and family understand what it is you do and won't take it personally, even if their lives also fall at the whims of others. And I'm lucky that I have a wife and increasingly kids who get it and who understand that Dad gets to have a lot of fun when he's doing that, but he does also come home and try to be Dad. So. And I still haven't seen Despicable Me. I hope to get beyond the first 4 minutes at some point. That's the memory I think of this cycle and how
Right, and just to absolutely close out, we've now known each other for about 25 years practically. And AU has been so much to me, just in general, putting me on a path and the experiences I had here. I'd love to just hear your take on just how important AU was to you. And I don't think 25 years ago I ever would have envisioned a scenario where I'd be asking you questions. I mean,
because I used to ask you questions.
Yes, exactly.
You were body president and I was a reporter. Look,
so I remember the first president.
You might have been. There was another guy too that was leading this place at the time. But yeah, I just remember learning about the Clegg program as a senior in high school, and I literally called the admissions office and said, "So you're telling me there's a degree I could get where I study communications, law, economics, and don't really have to make up my mind?" And I said, "Yeah." I hung up the phone. I turned to my parents and said, "That's it. That's what we're going. I'm going to Washington." I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you. And part of it was not only that you had a place to learn, but that you were on the edge of the city where I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do in my life, and I was able to do that. And it wasn't just about being taught and learning and living with classmates and meeting new people and having all sorts of new experiences, but it was being here on the edge of the laboratory, which is Washington, and the internships and the experiences of the people we got to meet, and watching so much of what we did then in journalism blossom into what it is today. So, I owe it to, and I met my wife here, right? Not for nothing, which makes it an even more important place. And we never entirely left the neighborhood. It's only like a mile and a half away. So, it's clearly a very important place. And always good to be back.
Well, we're so grateful you took the time to be with us today. Thank you so much. Appreciation to AU School of Communications for hosting us today and for everyone for joining us. If you're tuning in, you can always watch us at coffeewithken.com to catch up on future sessions or past episodes. Until next time, thanks so much. Ed.